Acts chapter 5, verses 17 through 26 begins with this: "But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him." At the very start of this text, we have the impression that the high priest is welling up within him with all of his authority. He wants people to know that he is in charge. So much so that they turn to the apostles and have them arrested and thrown into prison. Now Luke then turns and shows that they were miraculously released from prison. But what's very interesting about this is Luke doesn't spend any time talking about the release, the miraculous release from prison. In fact, he glosses over it. We know that he glosses over it because there are several other times in the book of Acts where Luke describes in much more detail the breaking out of prison, the miracle of being able to be brought out of prison. And so in this case, he kind of jumps over it. Why does he do that? Well, he's getting at a different point than focusing on the miracle. What does he want to focus on? The next thing that unfolds is the high priest came the next day to a trial. And so they and all their formality gathered together. You can hear them shuffling along the pavement and finding their places. It's quiet in the courtroom, and the high priest says, "Okay, now that we're ready, now that we have our argument against the apostles ready, why don't you go fetch the apostles, the ones that we arrested yesterday?" And they send to get them from the prison, and as they come back, they bring the report that they're not there. But what's interesting is while they're trying to figure out what's going on and why the apostles they're not in prison, the apostles have been busy teaching and preaching. They're focused on doing what they ought to be doing, proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ in the temple, the very place that the religious leaders ought to be teaching. And instead, they're busy themselves trying to convict these people who aren't even there. It's a very, very, very comical episode. In fact, one of Luke's primary purposes, I believe, in this text is to show the foolishness of the religious leaders. They're trying to get things figured out, they're trying to get things ironed out, and they are clueless as to what actually is happening in their place, the temple. And there they are standing, proclaiming the good news to the people. So one of the main elements to this text is grappling with who really is in charge. Now think about that question. Who is in charge? The next thing that happens is someone brings a report and tells the high priest that the apostles, the ones that were arrested yesterday, are free preaching at the temple. And so then they go and they send for them there, and without a fight, they bring them to this council, the Supreme Court, if you will. And there the apostles stand. What's striking about this episode is this: if the apostles had remained in the prison the night before, they would be in the very same place that they are at the end of this episode. There is no difference between where the apostles are at the end of this episode and where they would have been had they not been rescued out of prison. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, was the rescue out of prison in order to bring the apostles out of prison so that they feel better? Or was the rescue to bring them out of prison simply a way for God to say, "You, high priest, are not in charge. I am in charge"? And what it does is it reveals to all those around those religious leaders that they are clueless as to who actually really is in charge. Whoever thinks they're in charge doesn't necessarily mean that they are in charge. And sometimes God calls us to walk through trials. And as we walk through those trials, we ourselves, we need to remember that this isn't about us. This is about what God is teaching through us and to us. And we can't be thinking ourselves that we're in charge, that difficulties come because we have done something. But instead, God may be calling us to walk through a trial and then to end up before the high council ourselves. Either way, we must be proclaiming that Jesus is the Christ, worthy of all praise, and that we are loved by a great and awesome God.